if you can read an RC passage, an LR stimulus is not so bad.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 7-Stage LSAT podcast. I am one of your hosts, Henry Ewing, and I'm joined with my other two hosts,
Bailey Luber and
Sean Ali.
Amazing.
Full names today. I don't know. I feel like we're going to go for it.
Wait, yeah, perfect. Now
Don't
they all
look
know
this
us
up
by name. Yeah, please.
You might not
Don't.
like what you find.
Yeah, probably not, to be honest. I feel like I don't have a very
for
big.
Henry. Yeah, I've tried to look you up before.
No, I have a low key social media footprint. I'm not big. I don't know. I don't have anything to say. Okay, let's go ahead and we will get into our topic today. We've got I don't want to call it a confusing topic, but even today when we were formulating what we were going to talk about, it was a little bit confusing. So hopefully we will do a good job of explaining. We're going to be talking about the LR and RC and the RC and LR. If you don't know what those means, we're talking about the logical reasoning and how that is important for reading comprehension. And we're going to talk about how when you're doing reading comprehension, that's important for doing logical reasoning. There are skills in both sections that are helpful for the other section. I don't know. Is that a good way of putting it, maybe?
Yeah, I think you said it well. Very transferable skills. I think there's a lot of improvement in one of the sections can lead to improvement in the other and vice versa. And the more that you just make those connections, you're more aware of these question types that are similar, these strategies that you can copy over or kind of amend a little bit to apply to a longer passage or a shorter passage. It just kind of makes the whole test click. So let's talk about it. I don't know. Did you guys have any turning points when you were studying where you were like, oh, if I just approach this like the other section, maybe things click?
I think really materially, Bailey, I don't know if this fully answers your question, but one thing I get a lot from students is should I be focusing on LR and RC at the same time?
Yeah, let's start
should
there.
I do an hour of LR, then an hour of RC, and then come back and forth? And I would say, don't overwhelm yourself. If you start with LR and you learn the question types and you master logical reasoning, once you get to RC down the road, your skills will transfer. Working on LR will make you better at RC. And it's totally fine to do both at the same time. I think there's nothing wrong with that. But if all you have bandwidth for is to focus just on LR right now, don't feel like you're not spending enough time on or ignoring another section. Anything you do on any part of the test will make you better at every part of the test. So I think it's maybe a call to know that everything you're doing right now will pay off on everything in life.
That's true. Yeah, no, I mean,
pay off.
That is very true. And I think too, that also just reflects my own, and I think our recommendation too, where because there's two LR sections, maybe it's better to get the ball rolling on that first and give that a little bit more primary importance initially, because it's worth double the points the RC is. So I guess we could talk about how learning LR can be helpful for RC. One of the things that comes to mind is a lot of RC questions are inference questions, right? Where they are asking you, you can infer which of the following, or the passage supports which of the following ideas. And I think there's a lot of overlap between that and most strongly supported questions in your approach to that. I mean, would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, that's kind of actually what I was getting at when I asked my turning point question. That was the big aha moment for myself where I was like, wait, why am I so bad at these RC inference questions? Well, because I'm treating them like I'm supposed to make some sort of logical jump in my thinking. I was really trying to read between the lines and then ended up with an answer choice that just wasn't supported by the text on the page. I don't know what I was doing. I just thought that they required some sort of magic formula that I wouldn't have elsewhere in the test. And then as soon as I noticed that, I was like, oh, wait, we're not necessarily looking for weak wording, but for example, weak, easier to support wording is just easier to support, things like can, might, may. If in doubt in the RC section or in LR, you're stuck between two answer choices. They're both, as far as you can tell, supported by the text. Go with the one that has weaker wording. It's probably actually supported, whereas the other one likely is phrasing something in a little bit of a wrong way. But by the way, always, take the caveat on that with if it's strongly worded in the text, whether that's an LR question or an RC question, you could totally choose an answer choice for an inference question or an MSS that is strongly worded, must, most, always. It just has to match the support from the text. That's all that we're doing.
Yeah. Maybe we could jump into why softer word, like a can statement, is easier to support than a like will statement. I don't know. Could you maybe jump into that, Zishan?
Yeah, I mean, well, when you have stronger language, your burden of proof is higher. So if I'm trying to convince you of something that's very strong, uh, or that something will happen, absolutely will happen, this will happen tomorrow, uh, I need to probably disprove all the reasons it wouldn't happen, right? There's a lot more I have to prove to tell you something will happen and that nothing will steer that event off course, right? Than saying something might happen or can happen. Just introducing a possibility requires very little burden of proof because a lot of things are possible, for all sorts of reasons. Maybe this is a little vague and abstract. I don't know if I have an example off the top of my head, but just think if someone's selling you something very strong, that doesn't mean it's inherently wrong. It just means that they have a lot to do to convince you of that fact. If they're telling you something kind of weak, it can happen, it might happen. It's probably, there's a possibility. Then they don't have much to convince you that it's not a possibility, right? It's maybe the burden of proof is actually higher to tell you that it's impossible, right? So yeah.
Well, I mean, that something is impossible or something will, they're similar, right? If something's impossible, they're saying it definitely will not occur. And so you can think of it, barring determinism, right? You could say I might die of a heart attack tomorrow. I mean, I'd say that there's a non-zero chance that it happens. Versus I will die of a heart attack means that you are definitely going to. And so if I go on and survive tomorrow without a heart attack and I don't die of a heart attack, well, the statement that I will die of a heart attack, that was a false statement then, right? It is not true. But if I don't die of a heart attack tomorrow, it doesn't really make my previous statement that I might die of a heart attack false. Maybe it could have happened, right? Or I might get hit by a car tomorrow. All right, well, I go on and survive. I don't get hit by a car. That doesn't really mean what I said is false. And so the burden of proof is pretty low. And so that's why something like can versus will, it's hard to prove a can statement false, but it's very easy to prove a will statement false. I guess the same is true of like some and all, right? Like to prove all dogs have tails, easy to disprove. I mean, how many dogs do you need to find that don't have a tail to prove that it's false that all dogs have tails?
Just one.
Just
one. But how many dogs do you need to prove that some dogs have a tail? Just one. So, it only takes one to prove the sum statement. It only takes one to prove that the all statement is false. And so I think that can be pretty helpful.
I like what you said about outcomes. Like if you didn't die of a heart attack, that doesn't mean you couldn't have had one. You still could have. You still may have. It doesn't disprove it. But if you can think in sort of in outcomes, well, if this doesn't happen, am I wrong? Well, no. But if you said you will die of a heart attack and didn't happen, then you were wrong. And I like maybe framing it as outcome. Maybe that's helpful to some people. Sorry, Bailey, you were going to say something.
Shoot, I forgot it. It's okay. Wait, I was going to say something about quantifiers though, like logical quantifiers, logical modifiers. It's really helpful to just get a really good definition of those, especially when we're talking about this like spectrum of support, burden of proof. So some, like we were talking about, means just at least one, really easy to support. All that we need to prove it is at least one of those things does the thing that we're saying about it. The other is many. Many means about the same as some. I usually treat it as more than one, at least two. You can treat them as about the same, though. It really doesn't make a difference. One thing, though, is in context, many usually means whatever is a significant amount to the situation. I just wouldn't go further than thinking about what that number actually entails. It's more than one. That's all we know. Now, a lot of people mix up many and most, right? Like maybe in day-to-day speak, I say, oh, I have so many friends. Well, I have most friends. That's kind of weird, but you might be thinking that we need a better example for that. But basically, you might be thinking that many sounds pretty strong. Most sounds pretty strong. They could basically mean the same thing. No, on the LSAT, when they say most, they really mean more than 50%. Like they're so serious about it. They don't mess around with their words. The same with majority. That also means most. But other than that, like you're going to have very specific wording of at least half to be able to prove that it's most. And so most, when unsupported, one of those strong words that you want to look out for. And then all just means 100% of the things. I think that's like the main ones. You also want to know what those negations are, but
yeah. I think another place where this might like manifest itself, it's not necessarily in quantifiers in strong statements, but in unsupported detail. But we can reduce it back down to this idea of like what would you rather bet on?
Right.
It's like, would you rather bet I ate toast this morning, or would you rather bet that I ate sourdough toast that I cooked for 2 minutes and I used butter from France on the bottom of it? Like which of
I
those
know
is
you
more
would
likely
never
to
do
be true?
that, so I'm
But
going with toast.
yeah, well, toast, yeah, but it's like one
But
of those
regardless,
things.
even if I know nothing about the situation,
Right, yeah. If you know nothing about the situation, you'd probably want to bet on the former, because the threshold for that to be true is a lot lower than the threshold if I had toast but it wasn't sourdough. Then all of a sudden that other statement's wrong, whereas no, I still had toast. And so you can look for these answer choices, and this is a little bit harder to do, but sometimes, or what you'll often find, is that like commonly picked wrong answer choices have a ton of extra detail to them, and that detail will be unsupported. Now, it might be hard to figure out whether or not it's supported in the test, but if you're comparing two answer choices, you're like, I kind of like both of these. Maybe look for the one that has less detail to it, right? In other words,
Mm.
there's less of an opportunity for that answer choice to be wrong, whether or not you've read the passage. Does that kind of make sense? Is that aligned with what you guys?
Yeah.
It does. It does. Yeah. 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 It kind of reminds me, maybe this is pivoting a little bit away from the inference questions, but I think a big aha moment for me in LR and RC was kind of just to start thinking about like the author's voice. Like, what does this author think? If I were in a conversation with them, what would their disposition be? Um, how do they feel? What do they think? What kind of reasoning do they like to use? And in an LR stimulus, you're getting an author's point of view. 90% of the questions are like you're presented with an argument that sucks, and you
Yeah,
have to pick it
sure.
apart.
Yeah.
Right? It's like 90% of LR questions, few exceptions. Uh, an RC passage is kind of the same thing. You have an author's voice. Sometimes they introduce other people's voice. They say critics say, or some might think, or they might talk about their ops, but then you also get a sense of how they feel about their haters, right, or their dissenters. But it's all like the author's feeling all the way down. Maybe feeling is kind of a strong word, but you're getting the author's voice all the way through. And I think what made me a lot better at RC passages was keeping track of the author's voice. What does this person think? How do they feel about these given scenarios, these other people? And how are they crafting an argument overall? How does this whole passage become kind of an argument? It's kind of the same view you take with an LR stimulus. You just sort of expand it over a longer narrative that maybe introduces other voices and more examples. But you can kind of treat an RC passage like an LR stimulus in the way that it's an author telling you what they think. It's their voice, their opinion, their narrative. And if you can keep track of that voice and kind of separate yourself from that voice, well, that's what this person thinks. I don't have to agree. And now I'm going to answer some questions that basically try to characterize what they think, whether I agree or not. I think you'll be in good shape on both sections.
By the way, something that comes up a lot with that is students will be like, well, how did you know that this was where the author's voice came in? Or how did you know to pay attention to that? And part of it is just more practice. You get familiar with the ways that they phrase things. But the examples that I like to throw out that people can just like put in their back pocket, you can use this in LR and RC. Anytime that the author especially starts a sentence, but even mid-sentence throws in a little, but, however, nonetheless, yet, that's usually them saying, hey, listen up. I'm about to tell you what I really want to tell you. Happens in LR all the time, especially in contrast to other people's position, like we were saying in RC. Also happens in RC in the same way, but also just like even not in contrast to a specifically outlined other people's position. It's like, hey, here's some background information, but here's the problem. Like now I want you guys to turn on your listening ears. The other ones that I point out are indeed and in fact. I'm like, does an author ever have to say that something's a fact leading into a fact? No, it happens in way more RC passages than you think. And every time that you highlight those for author's position, literally almost every time it comes up as evidence for a question. Last one is any sort of choice words. I usually tell people to look out for like ly words, adjectives, adverbs, modifiers. Something is extremely problematic. Like, did they have to go as far as saying that? No, they could have just said it was problematic. Like, you really want to pick up on when the author went further than they had to neutrally share information on a topic.
That's a really good point, honestly. I don't think I've ever thought about that in RC. Maybe I should start thinking about it in RC.
Well, no,
you're right. Like when it comes to, because I think it's like something that's like in the background, but it's definitely better to like communicate that, right? Because in LR, like however and but tend to be those context indicators that introduce the argument. People say New York is the best city. However, I like LA because it's sunny or something like that.
Ooh, I like you saying that.
Well, I don't know.
I like the sound of that sentence.
I don't believe that.
Henry.
I actually don't believe that, right? But
Do we have
you have
LA
that
and New York
context
beef right
indicator.
now?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
we're always beefing.
Of course, East Coast versus the West Coast, but it's true, right? Like the however introduce the author's argument, and I'm thinking about like RC passages where they say however. I'm like, yeah, they usually are putting the however, even if they're not like it's not like an explicit like, oh, here's what they think and here's what I think, and that's the way the entire passage is broken down. But at like the individual level, let's say like some people say this, however, this is the case. Yeah, so I think that's a great tip to give. Like those context indicator words can be applied in RC too.
It sounds like what you both are getting at, correct me if I'm wrong, is like maybe identifying conclusions and argument parts also translates.
That applies
really
everywhere.
Well.
True. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like when I'm reading an RC passage, I'm never necessarily highlighting a sentence and being like, this is the main conclusion and here are the premises. But I think it's super helpful to just frame out like what you've been talking about. Where's the author actually saying what they really want to tell me? Like, what's the author's position here? And I usually just try to use the word position because sometimes people get really thrown off when you're thinking about like opinion or feelings. And they're like, well, that seemed pretty objective. And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's still what the author's trying to prove to you. Very similarly in LR, we're just trying to figure out what are they trying to prove to you? What do they give support for? Which, yeah, you can find that all over RC as well. And super helpful to walk away from the passage being like, I mean, for RC, it's not always like there's a sentence you can point to that's the main point or the main conclusion, but being able to see the broad strokes of the author's position throughout the passage and walking away with a succinct, hey, here's why the author wasted my time making me read this thing helps you so much. Same with LR.
Yeah, I love that reframing to positions because the other words can be loaded, feelings, opinions.
Right. People just have all these connotations. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because I often get the question of like, well, are you supposed to take all the premises in an LR stimulus as fact, right? You're not supposed to find answer choices that dispute premises. And it's like, yes, those are supposed to be fact. But when the author says their conclusion, it's not, maybe it's not an opinion. It can be a fact, but it's still their position. And maybe that's, yeah, I like that, Bailey. Yeah. Yeah.
Yay. I'm like, yay, thanks for hyping me up.
I know.
I'll hype you guys up too. You guys are sharing really good points. Ooh, wait, I got this from Henry actually. Sorry, like slight shift, but it'll hype you up at least. At least I got like the phrasing from you because I think one of the big turning points for myself as well for LR and RC, it kind of made everything click, even logic games, but whatever, they're gone, is to slow down in order to speed up. Like slow is smooth, smooth is fast. That's something I'm always telling my students now. I didn't always have the words to articulate that for myself, but when I realized like, okay, we keep rushing through the read of the passage or the read of the stimulus, not spending the time to seek author's position, break down the premises versus the conclusion, ask yourself, are you even buying it? Like if you don't do any of those things while you're reading, if you're reading too fast to give yourself the chance to, you're really not setting yourself up well for the questions. You're going to spend so much more time in the questions. You're going to actually go slower in the long run. Plus you'll be less accurate. So slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Am I getting that right?
I didn't come up with that, but
I know you didn't, but you say it.
Yeah,
I've heard you say it, and I was like, oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
It just articulates the point too, where LR, if you don't understand the stimulus, it's really hard to do well on the questions.
Going down those answer choices, honestly.
And so, in the breakdown between passage or stimulus and answer choices, it's usually like you probably spend a little bit more time in the stimulus than you do in the answer choices. The same is true in RC. It feels weird though because there are more questions.
Like everything in your body wants you to not do that. Like spend less time reading, spend more time answering questions because they seem so hard. But like, trust me, they get so much easier if you invest a little bit more time up front. And it's not just like read slower, but read with intent, read with purpose. Like I'm always making sure that I'm not moving on from a paragraph without checking in on, first of all, structure, like what role does the paragraph play in the passage? Author's position, what does the author really think? And then other people's position, if it's in there. Structure, AP, OP, keep it simple, keep moving. As long as you're doing the same things every time, you're going to get so much better at these.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like ideally a home run RC passage should feel like you spent a lot of time upfront reading and digesting the passage, creating your low res summaries, kind of knowing where the author's voice is, knowing the structure, and then you fly through the questions. Not that you rush, not that you're going fast, but that you don't really feel like you need to refer to the passage. Maybe you refer to a note here or there, but that they feel a lot quicker. They feel more obvious. And that would be a home run passage. A home run is not like you start with the questions and then you try to pick out the RC. You pass
Wait,
it.
yeah,
You know,
people love to ask about that. Like, can I start with the questions and then go back? It's like,
yeah.
not
Do
with this
not do
test.
that.
Does
You
not
know,
Come
make
from
sense. I don't
I think
know. Do
that's like an
people tell you to do
SAT
that for the
thing,
ACT
right?
or SAT? Maybe I don't think I've ever done that, but maybe it's a good idea for just tests that you have more time. Here, every minute really does count. Trust us when we say that you want to just read for structure, read for author's position, read for other people's position when you're reading. It's already going to prepare you for the questions. There's not too many different questions that they can throw at you.
yeah. I think being in school teaches you to be like hyper efficient, and so if I had a reading assignment growing up in school where I had to answer questions based off a text, I would definitely start with the questions and pick out the little section that
Mm.
answered the question rather than read
Yeah.
through the whole thing, because I was reluctant to spend my time reading because I had no attention span and I was young. And those habits stick with you because you feel like you're being efficient. The way to be efficient on the LSAT is to read up front. It's maybe a little
Mhm.
counterintuitive. Yeah.
No, that's so true. I just wouldn't read, to be honest. I just wouldn't do the homework. I
Oh, you
didn't.
in school? I
Yeah,
was
in
like,
school,
what are
I
you
was like,
doing, LSAT
I just
advice?
no, that's not L7. I just wouldn't do the homework. But yeah, no,
That sounds
that's
like
so
you.
true. I guess we could turn now to the RC and LR and what elements of RC help you in LR.
Right.
I guess because there's a lot of overlap between the two. It's like kind of a lot of what we just talked about applies the opposite direction.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I learned the reading for author's position and then brought that like from RC and brought that over to LR more so. But wherever you learn that, great. Just remind yourself that it's an applicable skill.
Maybe like endurance is a thing. Like if you can read an RC passage, an LR stimulus is not so bad.
Mm.
If you find that it's hard to
True.
focus your way through all the complexity of an LR paragraph, you might want to build up your stamina reading some longer material and tracing arguments through, a more complex, longer narrative, so that the LR stimulus feels short and sweet. I think you want it
Right.
to feel short and sweet. If you're intimidated by the length of an LR stimulus, or like if there's 4 sentences in a row and you can't keep track, you can only focus on the ones that have 2 or 3. Maybe you want to build up some endurance there with RC. Maybe that's a good way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Bailey. I totally interrupted.
No, you're good. I think it's my fault. I was gonna say that the students are always like, whenever I throw a huge LR stimulus on the page, they're like, "Oh, that's a damn RC passage." I'm like, "Well, trust me, RC passages are actually longer." And also, I used to be really freaked out when I would see a long LR stimulus. I'd be like, "Oh no, this must be a really hard question." Honestly, doesn't even mean that's a really hard question.
Those are
Yeah,
better, actually.
yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
like they're giving me more. I don't know. It depends. Like they might try to get you with some nitpicky wording, but they're giving you more information. Just look at it as a
Yeah.
plus. And it really
Just
doesn't take that much more time to read it. Just, cut the extra time that you're spending during the headlights and start right away. Just start reading.
Yeah, yeah. A short LR stimulus can be quite sinister.
I know.
Yeah.
Yes. I was just doing one of those with a student the other day where it's like the really short, I don't even know if I can reference it, but the short sufficient assumption where it's like, if a fruit is rotten, infected, inspected, that one's so deceivingly, like it looks like it's going to be so easy, but it's a very much 5-star question and people just always get it wrong. So don't judge a book by the cover.
Yeah, the shorter ones are a little bit more technical, right? Like the shorter LR stimuli tend to be more technical, and they will get you, or they'll hang you on like very subtle wording or very small shifts in wording, right? They tend to be, I guess, more conditional reasoning based too. Whereas the
Right.
longer stimuli, you can go with general. I'm not saying that like in what for day one studier thinks is a generalization is way bigger than what a generalization is, like with the types of generalizations I'm talking about. But if you're used to the test, or you've done a little bit of studying, the longer stimuli, you can play them a little bit more loosely. I would say that you can kind of more get like, all right, what is the essence of this first sentence, second sentence, third sentence, and the conclusion, which I think is, I guess we'll tie back to like low res summaries, right? Where when you have a very long RC passage,
Good.
you think about like, what's the low res summary of this paragraph? And what's the low res summary of the second paragraph? I try to do that with the longer stimuli. So I guess there's some overlap there. That's a stretch. And to be honest, I just invented that right now. All right, it's not that I just invented it. I just thought of that right now. Not something like
oh,
in
cool,
terms of like, oh,
that I actually do.
is that the RC and LR? I don't know. There's just something that you think about in LR. But I can see how the overlap there. Like if you're good at making low res summaries in RC, you can think, all right, well, what's the low res summary for this individual sentence in a long LR pass or stimulus? Yeah. I guess also too, like something we're talking about like reading for the main point or whatnot, like just knowing what the conclusion is talking about, I think is so helpful, right? If they're saying that, I don't know, cigarettes are cancerous, that's not really going to be influenced by whether or not cigarettes are like less cancerous than, a nuclear wastewater. Because all I need to say is that cigarettes are cancerous. And so like understanding that the conclusion there is like not a comparative, as long as we are showing that cigarettes are carcinogenic in some type of way, I think is good. Or if I'm making, if I want to conclude that dogs are, friendly, it doesn't really matter about other animals as much. I don't know. I don't really know if there's overlap between that and RC, but I figured I'd toss that in there.
Well, I feel like what you're saying is also kind of applying to just weaken and strengthen questions, type of answer choices that you'd want to look out for. Say that your conclusion say that your conclusion is some sort of like what you just said, and then all of a sudden answer choice makes a comparison. It's like, well, wait, I don't care about that. There's strengthen and weaken questions in RC. And by the way, one of my biggest pieces of advice for those, like a lot of times they'll say something like, which of the following, if true, would most strongly support the author's position? Sometimes they'll be nice and be like in paragraph 3, but other times they'll just be like the author's position. And so first thing that you do for an LR question is go right back up to the conclusion, double check that you understand what the conclusion is. Ask yourself, what am I trying to support? Same thing for RC. Make sure that you can articulate exactly what the author's position is that you're trying to support or undermine so that you can be better prepared for those answer choices. Like, I mean, I don't know when I learned that, but applies from either one of them. Whichever section you learn it in, great, transfer it over to the other one.
Well, one more thing I'll say, I love all the very specific points. Maybe this is a little more general, is like, I do think, and maybe this is obvious, goes without saying, but increased literacy is your friend on the LSAT and in the legal profession.
Right.
And I often tell students that if you want to get better at RC, you can read more, like read dense articles from The Economist or Foreign Policy or academic journals. And if you do that 10 minutes a day, one article, that's kind of the length of the RC passage, and you read it like an RC passage, read it for structure, read it for arguments, you will increase your general literacy over time and your ability to be comfortable with dense foreign material. Doing that daily, weekly, whatever, and increase, and you can get better. If you're not a strong reader, you can get better. If you can increase your literacy overall, it'll pay off in RC. It'll super pay off in LR. Just being able to read with a rhythm, being not afraid of complex concepts, and being able to track ideas, all of that is your friend on the LSAT. It will pay off in a huge way. And I think if you're a real beginner and you're struggling a lot just comprehending things, I think incorporating a little reading into your daily life will pay off over time. That's, I think, the stuff that maybe nobody wants to hear. But it's not, like if you've never been a strong reader, now is a great time to start becoming one, and you can become one. It's a muscle you can flex. So, I just wanted to throw that out there, that like, reading some articles every day, one article every morning, can really make you a better LSAT person, LSAT taker. I don't know what the noun is there. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I do agree. Okay, well, I was just gonna mention as a side note too. I mean, just as to what you're saying too, it is helpful to have like just some background general knowledge about the world on this test when it comes to RC, because those are all real articles, right? It's not like they're invented articles, like they're ripped from actual things, and they do align with real life. So too do like LR stimuli, right? Like usually what the arguments they give you, maybe they are bad, but they are like real life arguments that people have made. Maybe they're a little bit more distilled down. So just having some general familiarity with, like, I don't know, trade policy,
morality,
like that is helpful.
climate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
Highways,
unions. Yeah, right.
If you don't know what a union is, I feel like it's tough, because you see like, oh, union, you're like, oh, what's that? Like, what are they talking about there? Are they talking about like a marriage? Are they talking? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. One point that I want to make about that, though, is that you shouldn't be using your outside knowledge, and you've probably heard this enough, but we should always caveat this point, is like, you shouldn't be using your outside knowledge to justify an answer choice, or to add into an answer choice and then, make it seem right. That's just you justifying it. We don't want to be doing that. Although, yes, it can help you engage more, to just be more familiar with the world. We were talking about, like, students were coming to us saying, oh, well, I get all of my real world knowledge from the LSAT. And I'm like, ooh, Don't be doing that, because like Henry's right in the sense that these RC passages are abridged real articles, but they're abridged. I mean, I'm pretty sure that the facts in RC are usually right. LR, if you're getting your facts about the world from LR, please don't be. Like, it is just wrong about the world usually. But yes, just in terms of like being familiar with how people make arguments, what are just some things going on in the world, what should I be clued in as or clued into, that can definitely help for sure.
Yeah,
All
that's
right.
a great caveat, Bailey, that the LSAT is not real life.
Right.
Maybe that's the gist of
Yeah.
what you're saying. Yeah.
Because people will be like, wait, what? That's actually true about the world? I just learned that. I'm like, no. I don't think it is. It's all
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Well,
You're supposed to treat it as a fact.
I guess we'll wrap it up here. Thank you guys, everyone. Well, thank you to my hosts and also to those who are joining us through their ears.
Or
don't
eyes.
forget, or eyes.
YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube. Yes, YouTube. And make sure you comment and subscribe and ask us some questions for a free month of live, and drop us a follow on Instagram. We have a lot of great content on Instagram.
Yes.
It's fun. We talk about, I don't know, like social media. It's
TikTok,
cool.
Threads, literally any social media you can think of. I think
do we have
it.
TikTok too? I don't do TikTok.
Anyways, thank you all. Like, comment, subscribe, turn on the notifications. If you comment and we answer one of your questions, we will give you a free month of live.
Free month.
Until next time, a free month.
Why wouldn't you?
Crazy.